There is a strange discomfort that appears when everything finally slows down. Nothing is urgent. No one is asking for anything. There is no immediate problem to solve. And yet, instead of relief, you feel unease. A quiet tension in your body. A restlessness you can't fully explain. A subtle sense that you should be doing something, anything. Even rest starts to feel wrong. If this sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many people don't struggle with being busy. They struggle with stopping. They struggle with moments when there is nothing demanding their attention, because those moments bring something uncomfortable to the surface. Guilt. Not loud guilt. Not dramatic guilt. But a quiet, persistent feeling that resting is irresponsible. That doing nothing is wasted time. That slowing down means falling behind. So instead of resting, you distract yourself. You stay productive. You stay useful. Not because you want to, but because being still feels unsafe. You might tell yourself that this is just discipline, that you have high standards, that you like to stay active. But if you listen closely, something else is happening underneath. Rest doesn't feel neutral. It feels threatening. And the question is not why you feel tired. Question is, why does rest feel like something you need to justify? For many people, rest is not simply the absence of activity. It is the absence of control. When you stop doing, there is nothing to hide behind. No task to complete. No role to perform. And in that stillness, emotions have space to appear. Thoughts you've been avoiding. Feelings you've been managing. A sense of emptiness you don't know what to do with. So you stay busy. Because busyness feels safer than silence. Over time, this creates a pattern. You push yourself even when you're exhausted. You feel guilty when you take breaks. You feel anxious when you slow down. And the idea of rest becomes something you plan for later, after everything is done. But everything is never done. There is always one more thing. One more responsibility. One more reason to postpone rest. And so the body keeps going, long after it should have stopped. This kind of exhaustion is not caused by effort alone. It is caused by resistance to rest. Because rest forces you to face something you learned long ago. That your value might be tied to what you do, not who you are. For many people, rest feels undeserved. Not because they haven't worked hard enough, but because somewhere along the way, effort became the condition for worth. You may have learned that being useful made you acceptable. That being productive made you safe. That slowing down meant being a burden. So even when no one is demanding anything from you, the pressure continues inside. An internal voice that says, you should be doing more. You haven't earned rest yet. If you stop, you'll fall behind. This voice often sounds reasonable, responsible, motivated, but it doesn't ask whether you're okay. It only asks whether you're functioning. And functioning, over time, replaces living. You may notice that you feel most at ease when you are busy, when your schedule is full, when there is no space to feel. Because stillness creates vulnerability. And vulnerability, for someone who learned to stay strong, feels dangerous. So rest becomes uncomfortable. Not because you don't need it, but because you were never taught how to be still without guilt. This episode is not about forcing yourself to slow down. And it's not about convincing you to rest more. It's about understanding why rest feels so difficult in the first place. Because once you understand that, rest stops being an enemy. It becomes something else entirely. Something you don't have to earn. Something you don't have to justify. Something you're allowed to need. If rest makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't mean you're lazy. It means your system learned to survive through doing. And survival habits don't disappear just because life changes. They need to be understood. That's where we begin. Guilt around rest rarely appears out of nowhere. It is not a flaw in your personality. And it is not a lack of discipline. It is something learned. For many people, rest became uncomfortable long before adulthood. Long before burnout. Long before exhaustion had a name. It started in environments where stillness was not neutral. Where being quiet did not mean being safe. Where doing nothing felt risky. In some homes, value was closely tied to usefulness. You were noticed when you helped, praised when you performed, appreciated when you didn't cause problems. And slowly, a quiet lesson settled in. Being low maintenance is good. Needing less is better. Resting too much is suspicious. No one had to say it directly. You felt it. You learned to stay busy not because you loved activity, but because activity kept you connected. When you were doing something, you had a place, a function, a reason to belong. Stillness, in contrast, felt exposed. When you weren't doing anything, there was nothing to distract from what you felt. Nothing to prove your worth. Nothing to justify your presence. So rest became something conditional. Something you earned after effort. Something allowed only when everything else was done. Something postponed again and again. This pattern often followed you into adulthood. You became someone who works even when tired. Who stays productive even when drained? Who fills empty moments with tasks, screens, or obligations? Not because you don't know how to rest, but because rest triggers something deeper. When you stop doing, there is a subtle fear that something will surface. Thoughts you've been avoiding, feelings you've been managing, a sense of emptiness that feels unfamiliar. So you stay in motion. Motion feels safer than stillness. Over time, this creates an internal contradiction. Your body needs rest, but your nervous system resists it. You may sit down, but feel restless. Lie down, but feel alert. Take a break, but feel uneasy. And instead of recognizing this as a learned response, you blame yourself. Why can't I relax? What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. Your system learned that being still was not neutral. For some, stillness meant being ignored. For others, it meant being criticized. For others, it meant being left alone with emotions that felt overwhelming. So your system learned to stay active, to stay useful, to stay needed. Because being needed felt safer than being quiet. This is why guilt shows up so quickly when you try to rest. Guilt is not telling you that rest is wrong. It's signaling that rest violates an old rule. A rule that once kept you connected. You may notice that this guilt has a familiar tone. It sounds reasonable, responsible, almost moral. It says things like, you should be doing something productive. You haven't earned this break. Other people are working harder than you. This voice doesn't come from nowhere. It often echoes environments where effort was praised, but rest was overlooked. Where slowing down was seen as weakness. Where being tired was something you pushed through, not listened to. Over time, this voice became internal. No one needs to pressure you anymore. You do it yourself. And because this pressure feels familiar, you mistake it for motivation. But motivation energizes. This drains. It keeps you moving, but never satisfied. You may accomplish a lot, check things off, stay busy, and still feel restless, because rest was never integrated into your sense of worth. Another layer often appears here. When rest feels uncomfortable, it's often because rest removes distraction, and without distraction, there is space for questions you've been postponing. Am I actually okay? Do I like the life I'm living? What do I feel when I'm not performing? These questions can feel destabilizing, so you stay busy, not because you don't want answers, but because you don't feel ready for them. This avoidance is not laziness. It's self-protection. Your system is trying to prevent overload, but the cost of constant avoidance is exhaustion, because avoiding rest requires energy, and eventually, the body begins to protest. You may feel tired all the time, irritable, disconnected. You may notice that even enjoyable activities feel draining, because enjoyment requires presence, and presence requires slowing down. When slowing down feels unsafe, even pleasure becomes difficult. This is often when people begin to wonder why rest doesn't help. They take time off, but don't feel restored, because rest without safety is not restorative. The body may stop, but the system stays alert. Understanding this is important, because it shifts the question from, "Why can't I rest?" to, "What does my system associate with rest?" Often, rest is associated with vulnerability, with being unguarded, with being unseen, with being unnecessary. So your system resists it, not because rest is bad, but because rest once felt dangerous. This is why change has to be gentle. You don't overcome guilt by forcing yourself to rest more. You overcome it by creating safety around rest, by teaching your system that stillness does not equal loss, that you can stop and still belong, that you can pause and still be valued, that nothing collapses when you take space. This learning happens slowly, through small moments of rest, small pauses, small permissions, moments where you stop, and nothing bad happens. At first, these moments may feel uncomfortable. You may feel restless afterward. You may hear the critical voice louder. This doesn't mean you failed. It means you touched an old pattern. And old patterns don't dissolve immediately. They soften with repetition, with patience, with understanding. The goal is not to become someone who does nothing. The goal is to become someone who can rest without self-attack, someone who can slow down without guilt, someone who can exist without proving worth. That is not laziness. That is regulation. And learning regulation is not a moral issue. It is a nervous system process, which means it takes time and kindness. When guilt accompanies rest, it rarely stays confined to your thoughts. It begins to shape how you live, how you work, and how you relate to others. You may notice that your days are full, but not necessarily fulfilling. Your schedule is occupied, but your body feels heavy. You move from one task to another without ever feeling complete. This happens because rest has been framed as an interruption rather than a necessity. So even when you pause, your mind stays active, scanning, planning, preparing. You rest physically, but not emotionally. And over time, this creates a constant state of low-grade stress. Your body never fully returns to baseline. Your breathing stays shallow. Your muscles remain slightly tense. You may not label this as anxiety. It just feels like being on all the time. This constant activation affects your focus. You may find it harder to concentrate on one thing at a time. Your attention jumps quickly. Your mind seeks stimulation. Because stillness feels uncomfortable, your system looks for movement. This is why rest often turns into distraction. You sit down to relax and immediately reach for your phone. You lie down and start scrolling, not because you want to be entertained, but because distraction keeps you from being alone with yourself. True rest requires presence, and presence requires safety. When safety is missing, rest turns into avoidance. Over time, this pattern begins to influence productivity as well. Ironically, people who feel guilty resting are often very productive. They get things done. They meet deadlines. They push through. But their productivity comes at a cost. It is driven by pressure, not clarity. By urgency, not inspiration. So tasks feel heavier than they should. Even simple responsibilities feel draining. And because you rarely allow yourself to stop, you don't fully recharge. This creates a cycle. You feel tired. You push through. You feel more tired. You push harder. And rest becomes something you should do, but never quite allow yourself to enjoy. This cycle also affects relationships. When rest feels wrong, receiving feels wrong too. You may have difficulty accepting care. Compliments may feel uncomfortable. Support may feel undeserved. Because receiving requires stillness. And stillness, again, feels unsafe. You may be more comfortable giving than receiving. Listening than being listened to. Helping than being helped. Not because you don't need support, but because being supported places you in a passive role, and passivity feels like losing control. So even in relationships, you stay active, you show up, you contribute, you manage, but you may rarely let yourself be held emotionally. This can create a subtle imbalance. Others may see you as strong and capable, and assume you don't need much. And because you rarely ask, they don't offer. Not out of neglect, but out of misunderstanding. And this reinforces the belief that you must rely on yourself. The body responds to this imbalance. Over time, chronic rest guilt can manifest as physical symptoms. Persistent fatigue, headaches, digestive discomfort, difficulty sleeping. Not because something is wrong medically, but because the system is overstimulated. Rest is not just the absence of activity. It is a signal of safety to the nervous system. When that signal is missing, the body stays prepared. Even at night, you may lie in bed exhausted, yet struggle to fall asleep. Your mind replays the day, plans tomorrow, revisits conversations. This is not overthinking. It is vigilance. And vigilance was once necessary. There may have been times when slowing down meant missing something important. Times when being alert prevented harm. Times when rest wasn't an option. So your system learned to stay awake, even when you no longer need to. Understanding this matters, because it removes shame. Instead of judging yourself for not resting properly, you begin to see how rest was never modeled as safe. And what isn't learned early has to be learned later, deliberately. Another subtle effect of rest guilt is emotional numbness. When rest is avoided, emotions don't get processed. They are postponed. And postponed emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. You may notice that you feel less joy, less curiosity, less spontaneity, not because life lacks meaning, but because your system is overloaded. Joy requires availability, and availability requires rest. Without rest, even positive experiences can feel muted. This is often when people begin to feel disconnected from themselves. They don't know what they want. They don't know what they enjoy. They don't know what they feel beyond tired, because they haven't had space to notice. Space is created through rest, not forced rest, not scheduled rest that feels like another task, but safe rest. Rest where you don't have to justify yourself. Rest where nothing is expected of you. Rest where you are allowed to simply exist. For someone who feels guilty resting, this kind of rest feels unfamiliar, even threatening. So the system resists it, not because it doesn't need it, but because it doesn't recognize it as safe. This is why change must be gradual. You don't undo rest guilt by taking long vacations. You undo it through small moments of permission. Moments where you pause without reaching for distraction. Moments where you stop without self-criticism. Moments where you let your body soften, even briefly. At first, these moments may feel uncomfortable. Your mind may protest. Your body may feel restless. This doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're touching the edge of a pattern that has been running for a long time. And patterns soften through repetition, through consistency, through patience. The goal is not to become someone who rests perfectly. The goal is to become someone who no longer feels guilty for needing rest. Someone who understands that rest is not a reward. It is regulation. And regulation is what allows life to feel sustainable. Without it, effort becomes survival. With it, effort becomes choice. That distinction changes everything. At some point, when the body is exhausted and the mind has nowhere left to run, a deeper fear begins to surface. It is not the fear of being unproductive. It is not the fear of falling behind. It is the fear of what happens when there is nothing to do. Because when you stop doing, you stop distracting. And when you stop distracting, you begin to feel. For many people, this is where rest becomes threatening. Stillness removes the structure that activity provides. It removes the sense of purpose that tasks create. It removes the role that says, "This is who I am right now." And without that role, a quiet question appears. Who am I if I am not doing something? This question is not philosophical. It is visceral. It shows up as unease, as restlessness, as an urge to get up and fill the space. Because for someone whose identity has been built around action, stillness feels like disappearance. You may notice that, when you stop, your mind quickly looks for meaning. Am I wasting time? Shouldn't I be doing something useful? What does it say about me if I'm just sitting here? These thoughts are not random. They come from a long history where worth was demonstrated through effort. In environments where you were valued for what you did, not for how you felt. Doing became a form of existence. So when doing stops, existence feels unstable. This is why rest can feel empty. Not peaceful. Not neutral. Empty. And emptiness, when unfamiliar, feels dangerous. Because emptiness leaves space for emotions that were never given time to be processed. grief that was postponed, anger that was swallowed, sadness that was managed quietly. When life demanded functioning, there was no room for these emotions. So they waited. And rest invites them forward. This is not because rest causes these feelings. It reveals them. And if you were never taught how to feel safely, feeling can feel overwhelming. So your system reacts by reactivating, by finding something to do, something to manage, something to fix. Not because those things are urgent, but because they restore a sense of control. Control feels safer than openness. This is why the guilt around rest is often layered. On the surface, it sounds practical. I should be productive. Underneath, it is existential. If I stop, I won't know who I am. And beneath that, relational. If I stop, will I still be wanted? For many people, being busy became a way to stay connected. When you were useful, you belonged. When you contributed, you mattered. When you helped, you were seen. So rest threatens more than routine. It threatens connection. This fear often goes unrecognized. You may tell yourself that you're just not good at resting, that you're wired this way. But wiring is shaped by experience, and experiences where rest was associated with loss, with criticism, or with emotional exposure, leave traces. Another layer often appears here, the fear of the void. When activity stops and roles dissolve, there may be a sense of nothingness, not dramatic emptiness, but a quiet lack of direction. You may not know what you want, what you enjoy, what matters to you beyond obligation, because when life is organized around doing, desire is secondary. Rest removes obligation, and with it, the structure that told you where to go next. For someone who has always moved forward through responsibility, this lack of direction can feel destabilizing. So you return to movement. Even if that movement is exhausting, there is also a fear of judgment. Even when no one is watching, the internalized observer remains. A voice that evaluates, measures, compares. Other people are doing more. You're falling behind. You don't deserve this break. This voice is often inherited. It echoes environments where rest was moralized, where effort was praised publicly, where stillness was questioned. So rest doesn't feel like a personal choice. It feels like a moral risk. And morality brings shame. Shame is not loud. It is heavy. It makes you want to hide or compensate. So instead of resting, you do something useful to neutralize the discomfort. You earn permission to stop, briefly, before the cycle starts again. Over time, this creates a fragmented relationship with yourself. Part of you is exhausted and wants rest. Another part is vigilant and refuses it. And instead of listening to either part fully, you oscillate between pushing and collapsing. This is not balance. It is survival. Understanding this matters because it reframes the problem. The issue is not that you don't know how to rest. The issue is that rest was never integrated into your sense of self. It was never associated with safety, belonging, or worth. So your system treats it as unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory triggers caution. The way forward is not to force rest. It is to gently redefine what rest means. Rest is not absence of value. It is not loss of purpose. It is not withdrawal from life. It is contact with yourself without performance. And that kind of contact takes practice. At first, it may feel awkward, even boring, even unsettling. You may feel the urge to check your phone, to plan, to get up. Instead of resisting that urge, notice it. Notice what it's protecting you from. Is it silence? Is it emotion? Is it uncertainty? There is no need to answer immediately. Awareness is enough. Because awareness begins to loosen the grip of automatic behavior. When you notice the fear beneath the guilt, you stop fighting yourself. You stop forcing rest. And you stop shamming resistance. You begin to create a third option. Curiosity. Curiosity about what happens when you pause for a few seconds longer. Curiosity about what emerges in the quiet. Curiosity about who you are when nothing is demanded of you. This curiosity is gentle. It does not require conclusions. It does not demand change. It simply opens space. And space is what allows rest to become something other than a threat. Something that doesn't erase you, but slowly reveals you. If you have stayed with this episode until now, there is a good chance that something in you recognizes this pattern. Not intellectually, but emotionally. A quiet understanding that rest has never been simple for you. That stopping has never felt neutral. That stillness has always carried a cost. I want you to hear this clearly. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. You did not fail at resting. You did not miss a lesson that everyone else learned. You adapted to what felt necessary at the time. The part of you that resists rest is not lazy. It is protective. It learned that movement meant safety. That doing meant belonging. That staying active prevented loss. And when something learns that lesson early, it does not forget it easily. So when you try to rest now and feel guilt instead of relief, it is not because rest is wrong. It is because rest is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things activate caution. You are not broken for needing to relearn how to stop. Relearning does not mean forcing yourself into stillness. It does not mean silencing the voice that pushes you. It does not mean pretending that rest feels good right away. It means listening. Listening to the part of you that stays alert. Listening to what it is afraid of. Listening without judgment. That part has been working very hard. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to fight it. You only have to stop letting it make every decision. Rest does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. It does not need to last hours. It does not need to look peaceful. It does not need to feel restorative right away. Sometimes, rest is simply choosing not to add more. Not adding another task. Not filling the silence. Not explaining yourself. Sometimes, rest is letting the moment be unfinished. And allowing unfinished moments is deeply uncomfortable for someone who learned to survive by completion. So if rest feels awkward, that makes sense. If guilt appears, that makes sense. If your mind looks for reasons to get up, to check, to fix, that makes sense. These reactions are not failures. They are signs that you are touching something old. Something that once kept you going. The work is not to eliminate guilt. It is to move through it without obeying it. To let guilt exist without letting it dictate your actions. That is how patterns soften. Not through force, but through tolerance. You may notice that, when you allow yourself small moments of rest, moments without justification, nothing collapses. You are still valued, still connected, still here. This is how the nervous system learns safety. Not through explanation, but through experience. Over time, these experiences accumulate. Rest stops feeling like disappearance. Stillness stops feeling like danger. And you begin to notice something unexpected. Space. Space to feel what you actually feel. Space to notice what you actually want. Space to exist without constantly proving your worth. This space may feel unfamiliar, even empty at first. But emptiness is not absence. It is possibility. It is the space where parts of you that were never allowed to slow down can finally breathe. The part that doesn't need to perform. The part that doesn't need to justify itself. The part that doesn't need to be useful to deserve care. You don't need to meet this part all at once. You only need to allow it a little room. A pause between tasks. A moment without distraction. A breath without purpose. These moments may feel small, but small moments are how trust is built. Trust that rest does not erase you. Trust that stillness does not disconnect you. Trust that you are allowed to exist without effort. You are not here to constantly earn your place. You are allowed to take up space simply by being alive. If today all you can do is notice how hard it is to rest, that is enough. If all you can do is sit with the discomfort for a few seconds longer, that is enough. Change does not begin with comfort. It begins with honesty. And you have already been honest by listening this far. Rest will not suddenly feel easy, but it can slowly feel safer. And safety is what allows rest to become what it was always meant to be. Not a reward, not a weakness, but a form of care. You don't have to rush this. You don't have to get it right. You only have to stop believing that rest is something you must earn. You have already done enough.